Do you think your work has changed very much over the years?
It feels like it has. I feel like I've gotten a lot more confident with it. I feel like a lot of that confidence comes from knowing that I've already written enough poetry, probably, and so I don't feel like I have to add to my work, because it's basically at this point the additions aren't that substantial anymore. When I had a few poems, I wanted to generate some work, but now I feel like I've got enough to. I've got more poems. I've written more poems than anybody will ever want to hear.
Well, we want to hear some more.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Lay something else on us. Anything you want.
Okay. So I do the Man Who Was Never There. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay. Monday morning at the bus stop, the man who was never there was not there again. In a world teeming with unpredictable improbabilities, the one I can always count on is the man who is never there. Tuesday afternoon at an intersection, I had the impression that he was standing on the other side of the street, but a truck rumbled by and left in its exhaust no sign of him. All that I could do was to conclude that I had been mistaken. Wednesday evening, at a shop window, I thought I caught a glimpse of him, but when I stopped and looked once more, I saw no one in the store except a headless mannequin. I cast the mannequin an ironic grin and went on about my business. Thursday night, by the woods, I saw a man emerge as if he'd materialized from the trunk of an oak. He strode forward, nodded knowingly, and returned to me the same grin I'd given the mannequin on the day before. Then he spoke. "You know who I am," he said. And in that moment I thought perhaps I might know who he was. But by the light of Friday's dawn, I saw once more who he was not. For in a world teeming with unpredictable improbabilities, the one and only one I can always count on is the man who is never there.
Now, obviously, our audience can see that you do much of your poem from memory, which really amazes almost everybody I know in the circles. So few people can do that. Tell us how all that started and your process of doing that.
Well, it's a more laborious process than I like to admit, but I actually started doing it because there was someone who came to our venue, a monthly poetry meeting at the Big Blue Marble bookstore called Poetry Aloud and Alive that Connie really started. And there was a gentleman who used to come who would do his poems off the top of his head, and it almost looked like he was making them up as he was reciting them, and I thought, that's really cool. I thought, well, I'd really like to be able to do that with maybe I'll try to memorize 10 poems, So I started one by one, and it got to be, well, I guess an obsession.
Do you try to memorize, obviously you do it with your new material, do you go back to the old ones and try to do that too?
It's a funny thing what happens to them. Yes, there are some old ones that I wanted to add to my repertoire, and there are some new ones that I want to add to my repertoire. But as you memorize them, you find little changes that you want to make, because it doesn't. There's a smoothness that's lacking to them, and you don't feel that until you start to memorize them. At least that's been my experience. I have a different feel for a poem that I'm memorizing than I do for just writing it. And I think it helps it does help it to smooth out the poem, smooth out some of the rough edges, and make it easier to memorize, actually.
And when you are writing a new poem, is it in your mind or in the back of your mind that you're going to memorize this?
Sometimes.
Do you write to sort of head on the memorization part of it?
Well, sometimes there are poems that you can feel like well, this would be a good one to read out loud, or there are other poems that this is not a good one to read out loud. This is something that has to be looked at on the page, and an audience isn't just going to get it just by having you read it to them. They're really going to have to see it and maybe look it over again. But there are certain poems that, I'll have that feeling about. And there are certain poems that, I've run by you at the critique, and you say, oh, I can't wait to hear you do this one in a reading. So, you have an eye for that as well. So.
This might be sort of asking like a magician to give away his tricks, but how long or does it take for you to memorize a poem?
Oh, it depends. Yeah, some of them are really hard to memorize, and some of them are. The easier ones to memorize are the rhyme and meter ones, because it's almost like remembering a song. I mean, I think we all remember lyrics from songs without even realizing that we remember them. You have this catalog in your head of song lyrics that even though you didn't consciously try to memorize them. And those just kind of flow with the music, with the beat, with the rhythm. But the blank verse is harder to memorize. And there are some that if one idea leads naturally to the next, then that makes it easier to memorize. But if there are non sequiturs and there are breaks in the thought, and also if there's repetition that is near repetition but not quite repetition, sometimes you lose your place and you think you're in one place, and then you end up skipping a part of it without even realizing it.
That never occurred to me.
But these are the kinds of things that occur to you when you start memorizing. It's a little bit different perspective on the poetry.
All right. You mentioned Big Blue Marble, and I think you told me you've been doing this for like 10 years now?
More than that.
More than 10 years. So how did all that start? How do you feel about it? Has it been a good experience?
I didn't even know about this section of the city until I started dating Connie, and Connie lived here in West Mountain area. And shortly after we started going together, the Big Blue Marble opened up. And she said, oh, there's a new bookstore that's opening up in the neighborhood. And she said, maybe they would like to start a poetry program. So Connie really got me started doing this. And in December of 2004, I believe it was the first time we tried to have a reading. And I believe the first guest reader that we had was you.
It was.
And it was such a hit that it's been going on for 14 years since then. So
remember, it was a snowy night, and there were only about 2 people came. So all the employees of the store came also.
Right.
But by the next month, we had every seat was taken. The word had gotten around, I guess. Steve, you did such a good job.
So you've had fun doing this?
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. Dave Worrell has been a big help in booking different, great variety of poets for us the past few years, and it also became a Mad Poets venue. Which, I mean, how can you not mention the Mad Poets as an influence on our poetry scene, on the local poetry scene? We try to do our little bit here in West Mountain area with the Poetry Aloud and Alive, and people seem to like it.
Now, one thing that you do at your venue is you have the seats in a circle, which on the surface may not really seem like, okay, big deal, they're in a circle, as opposed to, the usual, but it is a difference, isn't it?
It's definitely a difference, especially in that particular atmosphere. It makes it a lot cozier. And that was Connie's idea, because she always had the kids arranged in a circle. She was a kindergarten teacher, and she found that arranging the kids in a circle got them more interactive with each other and got them more involved. And so she suggested that, and I remembered that Marty Collins, when she ran her Summer Breeze program at the Northeast Regional, that she arranged us in a circle also.
That's right.
And when
yeah.
Connie mentioned that, I thought, oh yeah, that can work for poetry, because I had seen it before, but I hadn't thought of it. You know, I probably would have arranged it in the traditional rows. But I'm glad you got me started doing that. Maybe that's what's kept it going all these years. Who knows? You know?